The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Penelope Smith clutched the letter that would seal her fate, her trembling fingers crinkling the parchment that bore her father's gambling debts and the cruel solution he'd devised. Montana Territory, 1875, a land where fortunes were made and broken on the turn of a card, and where a woman could become currency in a man's world. "Your train leaves at dawn," her father slurred, refusing to meet her eyes as he nursed his whiskey by the dying hearth. "Thaddeus Whitaker will meet you in Abilene. He's paid good money for you, and I expect you to be a proper wife to him." Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. At 22, she had long resigned herself to spinsterhood after nursing her ailing mother until her death 2 years prior. Now she was to be sold like cattle to a man whose reputation had reached even their small Ohio town, a cattle baron with a temper as vast as his holdings and eyes that were said to freeze a man's soul. "Father, please," she whispered, though she knew begging was futile. James Smith had gambled away everything they owned, including, it seemed, his only daughter. There must be another way. "There isn't," he snapped, tossing back the remainder of his drink. "Pack your things. One trunk, no more. Be grateful someone wants you at all." That night, Penelope wept silently into her pillow, praying for a miracle that never came. By morning, she stood on the platform, a single trunk at her feet, wearing her best dress, a modest blue calico that had belonged to her mother, as the train belched smoke into the pale dawn sky. The journey west was a blur of clacking rails and changing landscapes. Penelope watched as lush farmland gave way to rolling plains and eventually the rugged terrain of the Montana Territory. She shared her compartment with a kindly older woman who offered her dried apple slices and stories of her grandchildren, blissfully unaware that Penelope was traveling to a fate worse than the grave. 5 days later, the train screeched to a halt in Abilene. Penelope stepped onto the platform, legs weak from days of travel, eyes scanning the crowd for the man who now owned her. The description her father had given was vague, tall, dark-haired, with eyes like ice. She clutched her trunk handle tighter, knuckles white with dread. "Miss Smith." A gruff voice called from behind. She turned to face a man in his late 30s, clean-shaven but for a carefully trimmed mustache, wearing a black suit that seemed at odds with the dusty frontier town around them. His eyes were indeed cold pale blue and calculating as they swept over her, assessing his purchase. "Mr. Whitaker," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Thaddeus Whitaker," he corrected, taking her trunk without asking. "You'll address me properly as your husband." "The preacher is waiting. We marry today." Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. "Today, but sir, I've only just arrived and I paid for a wife, not excuses," he cut in. "Your father's debts were substantial. You do well to remember that." She followed him in stunned silence through the bustling town, past saloons and general stores where curious eyes followed her progress. Abilene was larger than she had expected, with wooden boardwalks lining both sides of the main street and horses tied at hitching posts outside various establishments. The air smelled of dust, horse manure, and wood smoke. The church was a modest white building at the edge of town. Inside, a gray-haired preacher waited, Bible in hand, expression impassive as Thaddeus explained the situation in terse terms that made Penelope sound like a mail-order bride rather than a woman sold to cover gambling debts. "Do you, Penelope Smith, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The preacher asked, his voice echoing in the empty church. She hesitated, looking into Thaddeus's cold eyes. There was no kindness there, no hint of the companionship she had once dreamed of in a husband. But what choice did she have? Alone in a strange town with no money and nowhere to go. "I do," she whispered, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. The ceremony concluded with brutal efficiency. Thaddeus slipped a plain gold band onto her finger not sized for her, she noted, as it slid loosely around her knuckle. The preacher pronounced them man and wife with all the enthusiasm of reading a grocery list, and then Penelope was being led back into the bright sunlight, a married woman. "My ranch is 20 miles outside town," Thaddeus informed her as he helped her into a wagon. We'll stop for supplies, then head out. I have business to attend to first. That business, it turned out, was at the saloon. Penelope sat rigidly on the wagon seat as Thaddeus disappeared inside the establishment, leaving her alone on the busy street. She contemplated running, but to where? With what money? The thought had barely formed when the saloon doors swung open and raised voices spilled out. "Whitaker, you cheating bastard," a man shouted, his words slurring slightly. Thaddeus emerged, his expression unchanged but for a tightening around his eyes. "I don't cheat, Jenkins." "You're drunk. Go home." The man Jenkins staggered forward, revealing himself to be a short, barrel-chested fellow with a ruddy face and wild eyes. "You stole my land. Everyone knows it." His hand hovered dangerously near the revolver at his hip. "Your land was forfeit when you couldn't pay your loans," Thaddeus replied coolly. "Now move aside. I'm taking my wife home." Jenkins's bloodshot eyes swung to Penelope, widening in surprise. "Wife, who'd marry the devil himself," he squinted at her. "Pretty little thing." "Too good for the likes of you, Whitaker." Penelope shrank back against the wagon's seat as Thaddeus's expression darkened. The tension in the air was palpable, the street around them gradually quieting as townsfolk paused to watch the confrontation. "Last warning, Jenkins," Thaddeus said softly, dangerously. "Step aside." For a moment it seemed Jenkins might draw his weapon. Then, abruptly, he spat on the ground at Thaddeus's feet and stumbled away, muttering curses. The gathered crowd dispersed, disappointed by the anticlimactic resolution. Thaddeus climbed into the wagon without acknowledging the incident. "We'll get those supplies now," he said, as if nothing had happened, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. At the general store, he purchased flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples while Penelope waited. The storekeeper's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, approached her hesitantly. "You're Mr. Whitaker's new bride?" she asked, voice hushed. Penelope nodded, uncertain how to respond. The woman pressed a small package into her hands. "Some tea," she explained, "and a bit of lavender soap." "A wedding gift. Thank you," Penelope murmured, touched by the unexpected kindness. "Just—" The woman glanced toward the store's interior where Thaddeus was completing his transaction. "Be careful, dear. Mr. Whitaker has a reputation." Before Penelope could ask what kind of reputation, Thaddeus emerged, and the woman scurried away. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and set off for the ranch, leaving Abilene behind as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. The journey was made in silence. Penelope, exhausted from travel and emotional strain, focused on staying upright as the wagon jolted over the rough terrain. Occasionally, she stole glances at her new husband, searching for any hint of the man beneath the cold exterior, but his profile remained impassive, eyes fixed on the horizon. The landscape grew increasingly wild as they traveled, the rolling grasslands giving way to more rugged terrain dotted with pine trees. They crossed a shallow river, the horses splashing through the clear water, before beginning a gradual ascent into the foothills. "There," Thaddeus said suddenly, breaking the hours-long silence. "Whitaker Ranch." Penelope followed his gaze to where the land opened up into a sprawling valley. A large two-story house stood in the distance, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Fields stretched beyond, dotted with cattle, and the whole scene was backdropped by mountains that seemed to touch the sky. "It's vast," she managed, the enormity of her new home overwhelming. 5,000 acres, he replied, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "Built it from nothing. No man takes what's mine." They approached the ranch house as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. A middle-aged woman emerged from the house as the wagon rolled to a stop, her weathered face curious. "Mrs. Jenkins," Thaddeus addressed her, "this is my wife, Penelope. She'll need to be shown around." The name Jenkins startled Penelope. "Any relation to the man in town?" she asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Jenkins's expression tightened. "My brother-in-law," she confirmed. "My husband worked this land before." She trailed off, glancing uneasily at Thaddeus. "I'll show Mrs. Whitaker inside." Thaddeus nodded curtly and strode off toward one of the outbuildings without another word to Penelope. Mrs. Jenkins helped her down from the wagon with a sympathetic smile. Don't mind his ways, she said quietly. The master keeps to himself mostly, comes with the territory out here. The house was surprisingly well appointed inside, with polished wooden floors, quality furniture, and even some paintings adorning the walls. Mrs. Jenkins led Penelope upstairs to a large bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in quilts. This is the master bedroom, the housekeeper explained. Bathrooms through there. Hot water's a luxury, but I can heat some for you if you'd like to wash up before dinner. Thank you, Penelope said, overwhelmed by the room that was now hers and Thaddeus's. The reality of her situation struck her anew. Tonight she would share this bed with a stranger, a man who had bought her like property. Mrs. Jenkins seemed to read her thoughts. I'll bring up that hot water, she said gently. And perhaps a cup of tea might settle your nerves. Left alone, Penelope unpacked her meager belongings, a few dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small leather-bound book of poetry. She arranged them carefully in the vast wardrobe that dwarfed her possessions, then sat at the dressing table, staring at her reflection. The woman who gazed back looked pale and frightened, her brown eyes too large for her face, her chestnut hair coming loose from its pins after the long journey. Dinner was a quiet affair. Thaddeus sat at the head of the long table in the dining room, Penelope to his right. Mrs. Jenkins served roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread before retiring to the kitchen. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse, Thaddeus explained, breaking the silence. It's just us in the main house, except for Mrs. Jenkins and her daughter who help with the cooking and cleaning. I can help with those duties, Penelope offered, eager to establish her usefulness. That won't be necessary. I didn't bring you here to be a servant. His gaze fixed on her, those pale eyes unreadable. I brought you here to be my wife. The implication hung heavily in the air between them. Penelope focused on her plate, pushing food around without appetite. You'll have certain responsibilities, Thaddeus continued, his voice matter of fact. I expect the house to be run efficiently. You'll host when necessary, though that's rare out here, and in time children would be appropriate. Penelope nearly choked on her water. Children, she repeated weakly. Not immediately, he clarified, cutting his meat with precise movements. But yes, eventually, a man needs heirs. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. Afterward, Thaddeus retired to his study with the excuse of paperwork, and Penelope found herself alone in the vast house. She explored tentatively, discovering a library filled with books and unexpected treasure that momentarily lifted her spirits. When she could delay no longer, Penelope returned to the bedroom and changed into her nightgown, a modest cotton garment that covered her from neck to ankles. She braided her hair and climbed into bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin as she waited, heart pounding for her husband to join her. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Eventually, the door opened and Thaddeus entered, already dressed in nightclothes. He regarded her silently for a moment, then extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the silver moonlight streaming through the windows. The bed dipped as he settled on the far side, maintaining a careful distance between them. "Good night, Mrs. Whitaker," he said formally. "Good night," she whispered, relief washing over her even as confusion took its place. Was this not what men wanted when they married? But she wasn't going to question her reprieve. The next morning, Penelope woke to an empty bed. Through the window, she could see activity in the yard below, men on horseback, cattle being moved, the daily workings of the ranch already in full swing. She dressed quickly in one of her better dresses and made her way downstairs, where Mrs. Jenkins was preparing breakfast. "The master's already eaten and gone out," the housekeeper informed her. "Said to tell you he'll be back for supper." Penelope nodded, uncertain whether to be disappointed or relieved. "What are my duties here, Mrs. Jenkins? I'm not accustomed to idleness." The older woman smiled kindly. "Well, Mrs. Whitaker, that's for you to decide, I suppose. The ranch keeps itself running whether we're here or not. Mr. Whitaker has his foreman, Mr. Cooper, who oversees most everything." After breakfast, Penelope ventured outside, keen to explore her new home in daylight. The ranch was even more impressive than it had appeared yesterday, with sprawling corrals, a large barn, and bunkhouses for the workers. In the distance, cattle grazed on lush grassland that stretched toward the mountains. As she walked, a tall man with graying hair approached, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Whitaker, I'm Tom Cooper, the foreman. Welcome to Whitaker Ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Cooper," she replied, grateful for the friendly face. "I've worked this land for 15 years, he continued. "Started when it was nothing but wild grass and dreams. Mr. Whitaker's built something special here." "It seems so," Penelope agreed, though she couldn't help adding, "though I understand not everyone sees it that way. In town yesterday there was a Mr. Jenkins." Cooper's expression darkened. Frank Jenkins, bad business that. His brother Elijah used to own part of this valley, got himself into debt, had to sell to Mr. Whitaker. Frank never accepted it, claims Thaddeus swindled them somehow. And did he? Penelope asked, immediately regretting her boldness. Cooper studied her carefully. "Mr. Whitaker drives a hard bargain, madam, but he's fair. Elijah Jenkins was a drunk who couldn't manage his affairs. What happened after was just business." He gestured toward a corral where several horses were being exercised. "Would you like to see more of the ranch? I could saddle a gentle mare for you." Penelope hesitated. She'd ridden occasionally in Ohio but wasn't particularly skilled. Still, the prospect of exploring her new home was appealing. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Cooper." The mare Cooper selected for her was a chestnut named Daisy, docile and patient as Penelope mounted with the foreman's assistance. He rode beside her on his own horse, pointing out features of the ranch as they went: the creek that provided water year-round, the best grazing lands, the boundaries that marked Whitaker property. "And over there," Cooper said, pointing to a distant ridge, "that's where the trouble started last month. 3 steers killed, throats cut clean, not wolves or mountain lions, human work." Penelope frowned. Who would do such a thing? Could be rustlers testing our defenses before a larger raid. Could be someone with a grudge. He didn't elaborate, but Penelope thought of Frank Jenkins, his angry words in town. They rode for nearly 2 hours, circling back to the ranch house just as Penelope's muscles began to protest the unfamiliar activity. As Cooper helped her dismount, she caught sight of a rider approaching fast from the direction of town, dust billowing behind him. "That's Charlie, one of our hands," Cooper said, frowning, "riding mighty hard for a routine trip." The young cowboy reined in sharply, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mr. Cooper, is the boss around?" "Out with the herd." "What's happened?" Charlie glanced at Penelope, then back to Cooper. "Trouble in town. Frank Jenkins is gathering men, says he's coming to take back what's his." Cooper's expression hardened. "How many? Dozen, maybe more." They were drinking, getting worked up, sheriffs trying to calm things down, but Charlie shook his head grimly. "Get back to Mr. Whitaker," Cooper ordered. "Tell him what's happening. I'll organize the men here." He turned to Penelope. "Mrs. Whitaker, you should return to the house. Stay inside until this is resolved." Penelope nodded numbly, watching as both men rode off in different directions. The peaceful day had suddenly turned ominous, and fear settled in her stomach like a stone. She hurried back to the house, where Mrs. Jenkins was kneading bread dough in the kitchen. "Something's wrong," the housekeeper said immediately, reading Penelope's expression. "Men from town may be coming, Mr. Jenkins and others." Penelope sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "They're angry about the land, Mrs." Jenkins wiped her hands on her apron, her mouth set in a grim line. "I feared this would happen eventually. Frank never could let go of his grievances." She moved to the window, peering out at the activity in the yard where ranch hands were now gathering, some carrying rifles. "This isn't the first time there's been trouble, but it's never come to violence. Let's pray it doesn't today." The hours that followed were the longest of Penelope's life. She paced the house, alternating between windows to watch the ranch hands establish defensive positions. Cooper had organized them efficiently, some stationed near the house, others at strategic points around the property. Mid-afternoon, Thaddeus returned, riding hard into the yard and dismounting in one fluid motion. Penelope watched from the parlor window as Cooper briefed him, noting the way her husband's posture stiffened. his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. When he entered the house, his eyes found her immediately. "You should be upstairs," he said without preamble. "I wanted to know what's happening," she replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Frank Jenkins is drunk and stupid, nothing new there." Thaddeus removed his hat, revealing dark hair damp with sweat, but he's convinced others to be stupid alongside him this time. "Mr. Cooper mentioned cattle being killed. Was that Mr. Jenkins's doing?" Thaddeus's gaze sharpened. "Cooper talks too much." He crossed to a cabinet, removing a rifle and checking its mechanism. "Go upstairs, Penelope. If shooting starts, stay away from the windows." "Surely there's another way to resolve this, without bloodshed? Some men only understand one language." He loaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. "And I'm fluent in it." "These are your neighbors," she persisted. "Surely they stopped being neighbors when they threatened what's mine." His eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Everything here is mine. I built it, I protect it. Including me," she thought but didn't say. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Cooper appeared at the door, face grim. "They're coming, about 15 men, armed. Jenkins is leading them." Thaddeus nodded. "Get into position. No one fires unless I give the order." He turned to Penelope. "Upstairs, now." This time she obeyed, climbing the stairs on shaky legs. From the bedroom window, she had a clear view of the approaching riders, a ragged line of men on horseback emerging from the tree line at the edge of the property. They advanced slowly, deliberately, their intent clear in their very posture. The ranch hands had formed a defensive line in front of the house, outnumbered but positioned advantageously. Thaddeus stood at their center, rifle held casually but ready, his stance betraying no fear. As the riders approached, they slowed, then halted about 50 yards from the house. Frank Jenkins urged his horse forward a few paces, separating himself from the group. "Whitaker," he shouted. "Time to settle accounts." Thaddeus didn't move. "You're trespassing on private property, Jenkins. Take your men and leave while you still can." "Private property," Jenkins spat. "This land was stolen, same as you stole that woman." He pointed toward the house, and with a jolt, Penelope realized he must have seen her at the window. "My wife isn't your concern," Thaddeus replied, his voice dangerously quiet even as it carried across the yard. "Neither is my land." "Last warning, leave. Or what, you'll shoot us all." Jenkins laughed harshly. "You don't have the men for that, and you know it." "I don't need to shoot you all," Thaddeus said evenly. "Just you, Frank. The rest might develop sense once you're in the ground." The tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Penelope held her breath, waiting for the inevitable eruption of violence. Then, surprisingly, a new voice called out from the group of riders. "This isn't right, Frank. We came to talk, not die for your grudge." Several of the men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Doubt had been introduced, and it spread visibly through their ranks. "Cowards," Jenkins snarled, turning on his followers. "He's one man with a dozen rifles at his back and the law on his side," another voice pointed out. "Sheriff Wilson's already riding this way with deputies." Jenkins's face contorted with rage. For a moment it seemed he might charge forward alone, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "This isn't over, Whitaker," he called, "not by a long shot." "It is for today," Thaddeus replied coldly. "Now get off my land." The riders turned their horses, all except Jenkins, who lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixed hatefully on Thaddeus. Then he too wheeled around and galloped after the others, dust rising in their wake. The tension didn't leave with them. The ranch hands maintained their positions as Thaddeus conferred with Cooper. From her vantage point, Penelope couldn't hear their words, but the grim set of their faces told her this reprieve was temporary at best. When Thaddeus finally entered the bedroom sometime later, his face was etched with fatigue. He set his rifle carefully in a corner, then stood at the window, staring out at the land that had nearly become a battlefield. "Are they gone for good?" Penelope asked softly. "For now. The sheriff will keep an eye on Jenkins, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head, "but he'll try again, eventually." Thaddeus turned to face her. "You should know what you've married into, Penelope. This land breeds hard men. I'm one of them. I take what I want and I keep it, whatever the cost." "Is that what I am?" she asked, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Something you've taken, something you own. His eyes narrowed slightly. I paid your father's debts. In the eyes of the law and God, you're my wife. A transaction, she said bitterly. Like buying land from a desperate man. Something flickered in his expression, anger perhaps, or surprise at her boldness. You know nothing about my dealings with Elijah Jenkins, he said tersely, or any other business of mine. Then tell me, she challenged. If I'm to be shot at for living here, I deserve to know why. For a long moment, Thaddeus regarded her silently, then, unexpectedly, he nodded. Fair enough. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than his years. Elijah Jenkins and his brother Frank came here 15 years ago, same time as me. We were all looking for a fresh start. They settled this valley first, built a small ranch. I bought the adjacent land. He paused, rubbing a hand over his face. For a while, we were even friendly. Then Elijah's wife died in childbirth. He started drinking, gambling. His ranch began failing. I offered to buy him out fair price, better than he'd get from anyone else. He agreed. And Frank didn't, Penelope guessed. Frank was away driving cattle to Kansas City. By the time he returned, the deal was done. He's convinced I took advantage of his brother's weakness. Thaddeus's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. Maybe I did. Business is business, but I didn't force Elijah to sign anything. What happened to Elijah? Drank himself to death 2 years later. Frank's blamed me ever since. Penelope absorbed this, trying to reconcile the cold businessman before her with the desperate violence that had nearly erupted today. And the cattle killings, was that Frank's doing? Almost certainly, though I can't prove it. He's trying to provoke me into doing something the law would punish me for. Thaddeus stood abruptly. Enough talk. We're doubling the guards tonight. You should rest. He moved to leave, but Penelope's voice stopped him at the door. Why did you marry me, really? You could have found a willing bride, someone who wanted to be here. Why buy a stranger? Thaddeus paused, his back to her. I needed a wife. You needed a home. It's a practical arrangement. He glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Good night, Penelope. After he left, Penelope sat alone in the gathering darkness, contemplating her new reality. A loveless marriage to a hard man in a dangerous place, caught in a feud she barely understood. She should be terrified, desperate to escape. Instead, she found herself curious about Thaddeus Whitaker, about the land he was willing to kill for, about the life she might build here if given the chance. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing with the day's events. When dawn broke, she was already dressed and downstairs, finding Mrs. Jenkins preparing breakfast as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. The master's already out checking the herds with Mr. Cooper, the housekeeper informed her, said he'd be back by midday. Penelope nodded, accepting a cup of coffee. Mrs. Jenkins, how long have you worked for Mr. Whitaker? Going on 10 years now, the older woman replied, cracking eggs into a bowl. Came after my husband died, needed the work, and Mr. Whitaker offered fair wages and a roof for me and my girl. What kind of employer is he? Penelope asked carefully. Mrs. Jenkins considered the question as she whisked the eggs. Demanding but fair. Expects things done right, doesn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but he's never raised his voice to me or Laura, never docked wages when I needed time to care for her when she was sick. She poured the eggs into a hot pan. He's not an easy man, Mrs. Whitaker, but he's a decent one in his way. It was a more generous assessment than Penelope had expected, and his business dealings, with the Jenkins brothers, for instance, the housekeeper's hands stilled momentarily. Not my place to speak on such matters, please, Penelope pressed. I'm trying to understand the man I've married. Mrs. Jenkins sighed, checking that they were alone before continuing in a lowered voice. Elijah Jenkins was a good man once before grief broke him. His ranch was failing long before Mr. Whitaker offered to buy it. Land would have gone to the bank otherwise and for less money, so no, I don't think Mr. Whitaker cheated him. She turned back to her cooking, but Frank never saw it that way. Been nursing that grudge for years, letting it poison him. Do you think he'll try again to take the ranch? Men like Frank don't let go easily, Mrs. Jenkins said grimly. But Mr. Whitaker won't either. He built this place from nothing, worked himself nearly to death some years. It's not just land to him, it's his life's work. After breakfast, Penelope found herself drawn to Thaddeus's study, a room she hadn't yet explored. It was a masculine space, with a large desk, leather chair, and bookshelves lined with volumes on cattle breeding, land management, and surprisingly, several novels. A map of the ranch hung on one wall, carefully drawn and annotated in Thaddeus's neat handwriting. On the desk lay account books, meticulously maintained. Penelope hesitated, then sat in the chair and opened the most recent one. The entries were precise, documenting every expense and income of the ranch. Far from the haphazard bookkeeping her father had practiced, this was the work of a disciplined mind. One entry caught her eye: a payment to a Dr. Morrison for medical services. The date was just 3 months ago, and the amount substantial. Curious, she flipped through earlier books, finding similar entries scattered over the past year. Finding anything interesting? Penelope startled, nearly dropping the book as she looked up to find Thaddeus standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, closing the ledger. "I shouldn't have pried." "No, you shouldn't have." He crossed to the desk and took the book from her hands, replacing it precisely where it had been. "But since you have, you might as well ask what you want to know." Emboldened by his unexpected response, Penelope asked, "Who is Dr. Morrison?" "The payments to him are quite regular." Thaddeus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He's a specialist from Denver. I brought him here to treat my condition." "You're ill?" Penelope asked, surprised. He certainly didn't look unwell, tall and strong, with no obvious signs of ailment. "I suffer from seizures. They're unpredictable, though less frequent with medication." He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather rather than a personal affliction. "Few people know." "I prefer to keep it that way." Penelope absorbed this revelation, understanding suddenly why a man of his means might have difficulty finding a willing bride. In an era where such conditions were often misunderstood or feared, it would be a significant obstacle. "Is that why you arranged our marriage?" she asked carefully. "Partly," he admitted. "Most women, once they learn of it, are quick to lose interest. Your father needed money. I needed a wife who wouldn't flee at the first sign of weakness." His eyes held her steadily. "Does it frighten you?" "No," she answered honestly. "My mother had spells of fainting. I cared for her for years. I'm not afraid of illness." Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or surprise. "Good, because I'm not an invalid. I run this ranch, and I do it well, seizures or no." "I never suggested otherwise," Penelope replied quietly. A moment of understanding passed between them, not warmth exactly, but a new clarity. Thaddeus nodded once, then gestured to the door. "Cooper wants to show you more of the ranch today. He thinks you should learn to ride properly if you're going to live here." "I'd like that," she said, rising from his chair. As she moved to pass him, he added, "The doctor visits quarterly. He'll be here next month. You'll meet him then." It was, she realized, his way of including her in this private aspect of his life, a small concession, but significant nonetheless. The following weeks established a routine of sorts. Penelope spent her mornings learning the workings of the ranch house, afternoons riding with Cooper or exploring the property, and evenings in quiet coexistence with Thaddeus. They dined together, occasionally conversing about the day's events, before retiring to their shared bedroom where he maintained a respectful distance. She discovered that he was well-read despite his frontier lifestyle, often finding him with a book in the evenings. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond ranch matters to literature, politics, and even philosophy. Thaddeus possessed a sharp, analytical mind that Penelope found herself enjoying, even as his emotional reserve remained firmly in place. The threat from Frank Jenkins lingered, but as days passed without incident, the tension at the ranch gradually eased. More ranch hands were hired, patrols maintained, but daily life resumed its rhythm. Penelope began to feel less like an intruder and more like she belonged, particularly as Mrs. Jenkins and the ranch hands accepted her as their employer's wife. One evening in late September, as the first chill of autumn crept into the air, Penelope sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. Thaddeus joined her, offering a woolen shawl which she gratefully wrapped around her shoulders. "It's beautiful here," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I never imagined Montana would be so magnificent. It can be harsh too," he replied. "Winters are long and brutal. The land gives nothing easily." "Like its people," she observed with a small smile. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Perhaps." He leaned against the porch railing, his gaze on the distant mountains. "The first winter I spent here, I nearly died. Cabin roof collapsed under heavy snow. I was trapped for 2 days before Cooper found me." Penelope turned to him, surprised by the personal anecdote. Thaddeus rarely spoke of his past. "Is that when you and Mr. Cooper became friends?" "Cooper's not my friend," he corrected. "He's my employee." "He speaks of you with respect," Penelope pointed out. "That's more than many employers can claim." Thaddeus considered this. "Respect is earned. I pay fair wages, provide good conditions. In return, I expect loyalty and hard work. And you get it," she acknowledged, "even in the face of danger." When Frank Jenkins came with his men, not a single hand deserted. Something like pride flickered across his features. "They're good men." They lapsed into silence again, watching as stars appeared in the deepening twilight. Penelope found herself acutely aware of Thaddeus beside her, not just his physical presence, but the complexity of the man she was beginning to know. Cold and calculating in business, yet fair to those who worked for him. Distant as a husband, yet respectful of her position in his household. "Winter will come early this year," he said eventually. "We should arrange for new winter clothing for you. Mrs. Jenkins can help with measurements." "Thank you," Penelope replied, touched by the consideration. "I've never experienced a Montana winter. You'll need sturdier boots, warmer coats." "Gloves, scarves." He glanced at her, his pale eyes softened by the gathering darkness. "And a better horse. Daisy's gentle, but she's too old for deep snow. I'll find you something more suitable." Before she could respond, a rider appeared in the distance, approaching rapidly from the direction of town. Thaddeus straightened, instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, moving swiftly down the porch steps. Cooper emerged from the bunkhouse, intercepting the rider as he reined in his lathered horse. Penelope couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Cooper's posture stiffen before he turned to call for Thaddeus. The 3 men conferred briefly, then the rider remounted and galloped toward the northern pastures where other hands were still working. Cooper and Thaddeus headed for the house, their expressions grim. "What's happened?" Penelope asked as they reached the porch. "Frank Jenkins is dead," Thaddeus announced without preamble. "Shot outside the saloon in town an hour ago." "Dead," Penelope echoed, shocked. "Who shot him?" "Unknown. Sheriff's investigating." Thaddeus turned to Cooper. "Double the night watch. This could be the start of something bigger." Cooper nodded grimly. "You think it's related to the threats he made?" "I think Frank had enemies besides me," Thaddeus replied, "but his friends might not see it that way." After Cooper left to organize the ranch hands, Thaddeus ushered Penelope inside, his hand at the small of her back the first time he had touched her in weeks. "You think they'll blame you," she said as he closed and locked the door behind them. "It's the obvious conclusion," he agreed, crossing to the cabinet where he kept his weapons. "I was in town yesterday. People saw us argue outside the general store. But you've been here all day," Penelope pointed out. "Surely that's proof enough." Thaddeus checked the loading of his revolver with practiced efficiency. Men looking for someone to blame rarely concern themselves with proof. That night, Penelope lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranchmen's voices as shifts changed, horses whinnying in the corrals, the creak of the house settling. Beside her, Thaddeus slept fitfully, his breathing uneven. She studied his profile in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, making him appear younger, less forbidding. The man who had purchased her like property, who ruled his domain with cold precision, looked almost vulnerable. A sudden shout from outside jolted her fully awake. Thaddeus was already moving, grabbing his revolver from the bedside table and crossing to the window in one fluid motion. "What is it?" Penelope asked, clutching the quilt to her chest. "Stay down," he ordered, peering cautiously through the curtains. After a moment, his shoulders relaxed slightly. Just a hand spooked by shadows, Cooper's handling it. He returned to bed, setting the revolver within easy reach. Try to sleep, he advised. Morning comes early on a ranch. I can't, she admitted. I keep thinking about Mr. Jenkins, who would want him dead. Thaddeus sighed, sitting up against the headboard. Half the county, probably. Frank was quick to anger, slow to forgive, made enemies everywhere he went. Including you, Penelope said quietly. His eyes found hers in the darkness. I didn't kill him, if that's what you're asking. I wasn't, she assured him, but others might wonder. Let them wonder, he replied dismissively. Sheriff Wilson knows I was here all day. Cooper and a dozen hands can confirm it. Penelope hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. What will happen to his property now? His portion of the original Jenkins ranch. Thaddeus was silent for a long moment. It will go to his next of kin. He has a nephew in California, I believe. Will you try to buy it? She held her breath, waiting for his reaction to her boldness. To her surprise, he answered candidly. Yes, eventually. It adjoins my land, makes sense to consolidate. Even knowing how people might interpret that after his death, I didn't build this ranch by concerning myself with gossip, he said, a edge creeping into his voice. No, she agreed. You built it by taking what you wanted. The words hung between them, charged with multiple meanings. Thaddeus regarded her steadily, his expression inscrutable in the moonlight. Is that how you see me, Penelope, a taker? I see a man who knows what he wants and pursues it relentlessly, she replied carefully. Sometimes at great cost to others. And to myself, he added quietly. Before she could respond, he continued, Your father owed significant debts. Did he tell you to whom? Penelope frowned, caught off guard by the change in subject. Various creditors, I assumed. One creditor, me. Thaddeus held her startled gaze. James Smith borrowed money from me 2 years ago for a business venture that failed. He's been avoiding payment ever since. You knew my father before our arrangement. Penelope struggled to process this revelation. I knew of him. We corresponded regarding the debt. His voice remained calm, matter of fact. When it became clear he couldn't or wouldn't pay, I offered an alternative. Me, she whispered, a new understanding dawning. But why? You could have seized his property, had him arrested. A small house in Ohio held no interest for me, and what would arresting him accomplish? Thaddeus shifted slightly, his shoulder almost touching hers. I needed a wife. He needed salvation from his debts. It was a practical solution. Practical, she echoed, the word tasting bitter. Did you even know what I looked like before I arrived? No, he admitted. But does that matter? Beauty fades. I needed someone capable, intelligent, someone who could adapt to life here. His eyes held hers. Your father described you as resilient, educated. Said you'd managed his household since your mother's death. So I was qualified for the position, Penelope said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Like hiring a housekeeper. Thaddeus frowned. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She challenged. Why me specifically? There must have been other women whose fathers owed you money. For the first time since she'd known him, Thaddeus seemed at a loss for words. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never witnessed before. I don't know, he finally confessed. Something in your father's description, it resonated. A woman who'd faced hardship without breaking, who'd cared for her mother through illness. He paused. Someone who might understand a man with complications. Penelope absorbed this, seeing their arrangement in a new light. Not just a cold business transaction, but something more nuanced, a calculated risk on both their parts. And now that you've met me, she asked softly, do I meet the requirements of the position? Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight quirk of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile. You exceed them. The unexpected compliment warmed her more than it should have. Before she could respond, a shout from outside shattered the moment, more urgent this time, followed by the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. Thaddeus was on his feet instantly, grabbing his revolver. Stay here, he ordered, pulling on trousers and a shirt with swift efficiency. What's happening? Penelope asked, fear clenching her stomach as more shouts echoed from outside. Trouble, he said grimly, checking his weapon. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Cooper. With that, he was gone, leaving Penelope alone in the suddenly vast bedroom. She hastily dressed, her fingers fumbling with buttons as more gunshots rang out. From the window, she could see chaos in the yard below, men running for cover, flashes of gunfire from the darkness beyond. Heart pounding, she ran downstairs to find Mrs. Jenkins and her daughter Laura huddled in the kitchen, faces pale with fear. They came from the north pasture, Mrs. Jenkins explained, her voice shaking. Must have circled around to avoid the main approach. How many? Penelope asked, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. Can't tell. At least 6, maybe more. The housekeeper clutched her daughter's hand. Mr. Cooper was expecting trouble from town, but they came from the other direction. Another volley of gunfire erupted, closer this time. Penelope moved to the window, carefully peering out. In the yard, she could see ranch hands returning fire from behind water troughs and wagon wheels. Cooper was shouting orders, organizing the defense. Thaddeus was nowhere in sight. We need to move away from the windows, Penelope decided, her mind racing. Is there a safer place in the house? Root cellar, Mrs. Jenkins said immediately. Through the pantry, solid door with a good lock. Go there now, Penelope instructed. Take food and water, this might last a while. As the two women hurried to follow her directions, Penelope remained in the kitchen, torn between seeking safety and needing to know what was happening outside. The shooting had become sporadic, punctuated by shouts she couldn't quite make out. The back door suddenly burst open, causing Penelope to stifle a scream. Thaddeus entered, dragging a bleeding ranch hand with him. Cooper followed, backing in with his rifle raised. Clear the table, Thaddeus ordered, recognizing Penelope. Together they swept aside the breakfast preparations as the injured man was laid on the kitchen table. Bullet grazed his side, Cooper explained, ripping open the man's shirt to reveal a bloody furrow across his ribs. Nothing vital hit, but he's losing blood. Mrs. Jenkins sent Laura for the doctor, but town's an hour away, Thaddeus said, examining the wound. I can help, Penelope offered, stepping forward. I tended my mother through her illness. I know basic wound care. Thaddeus hesitated only a moment before nodding. Cooper, get back out there. Coordinate the men. I want those shooters identified. As Cooper departed, Penelope gathered clean cloths, a basin of water, and the bottle of whiskey Thaddeus indicated from a cabinet. Working together, they cleaned and bandaged the young ranch hand's injury. Who's attacking us? Penelope asked as she pressed a clean cloth to the wound. Friends of Frank Jenkins, most likely, Thaddeus replied, holding the wounded man steady, seeking revenge for his death. But you didn't kill him, she protested. Doesn't matter, they need someone to blame. His expression darkened. And I'm the obvious target. The injured man groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Boss, they're coming from the North Ridge, at least 8 men. Rest easy, Sam, Thaddeus said, his voice gentler than Penelope had ever heard it. You're safe now. Once Sam's wound was bandaged and he'd been moved to a pallet in the pantry, Thaddeus checked his revolver, preparing to return outside. Stay inside, he told Penelope. Keep the doors locked. If anyone tries to enter who isn't one of our men, there's a shotgun in the cabinet by the fireplace. You can't go back out there, she protested, gripping his arm. They're after you specifically. It's my ranch, my men, he replied firmly. I won't hide while they fight my battle. At least wait until daylight, she pleaded. They have the advantage in darkness. He hesitated, seeming to weigh her words. Outside, the gunfire had subsided, though occasional shots still rang out. Cooper has them contained for now, he conceded. But at first light, we end this. Relief flooded through Penelope. Thank you, she whispered. Thaddeus looked down at her hand, still clutching his arm, then back to her face. Something unreadable passed through his eyes before he gently disengaged himself. Check on Sam regularly, he instructed. I'll be in the front room watching the yard. The night passed in tense vigilance. Twice more, bursts of gunfire broke the silence, but no further casualties were brought to the house. Penelope divided her time between tending to Sam, checking on Mrs. Jenkins and Laura in the root cellar, and bringing coffee to Thaddeus as he maintained his watch. As dawn approached, Penelope found herself beside him at the window, watching the eastern sky lighten. The ranch yard was eerily silent, ranch hands positioned behind makeshift barricades, waiting. They might have withdrawn in the night, she suggested hopefully. Thaddeus shook his head. They're still out there, waiting, same as us. As if to confirm his assessment, a shot rang out from the direction of the barn, splintering wood near one of the ranch hands. The man returned fire immediately, and suddenly the morning erupted in gunfire. "Stay back," Thaddeus warned, moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" Penelope asked, alarm rising within her, to end this. His expression was grim, determined. "They want me. I'm going to give them what they want." Before she could protest, he was gone, striding purposefully into the yard with his revolver drawn. Penelope rushed to the window, heart in her throat, as Thaddeus walked to the center of the ranch yard, fully exposed. Enough. His voice rang out, cutting through the gunfire which gradually ceased. "You came for me. Here I am." From the tree line at the edge of the property, figures emerged, men with rifles, moving cautiously forward. "Jenkins is dead," Thaddeus continued, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. "I didn't kill him, but that doesn't matter to you. You want blood." The leader of the group, a burly man with a red beard, stepped forward. "You as good as killed him, Whitaker, stole his land, drove him to ruin." "I bought land from a willing seller," Thaddeus countered. "Frank's grievances died with him. This ends now, before more men get hurt." "It ends when you're dead," the red-bearded man snarled, raising his rifle. What happened next unfolded with lightning speed. As the man took aim, Cooper emerged from behind the water trough, rifle leveled. Simultaneously, the sound of pounding hooves filled the air as riders appeared from the direction of town. The sheriff and his deputies, arriving at last. "Lower your weapons," Sheriff Wilson shouted as his men fanned out, rifles trained on the attackers. "This ends now." A tense standoff ensued, moments stretching into what felt like hours to Penelope as she watched from the window, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, the red-bearded man lowered his rifle, his companions reluctantly following suit. "Take them into custody," the sheriff ordered his deputies. "Attacking a ranch in the dead of night, you'll all face charges." As the attackers were disarmed and rounded up, Thaddeus remained standing in the yard, unmoving. Only when the sheriff approached him did he finally holster his revolver. Penelope sagged against the window frame, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. It was over. Somehow, incredibly, it was over without Thaddeus being harmed. The aftermath of the attack brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. The doctor arrived to properly treat Sam's wound, pronouncing Penelope's care exemplary. The sheriff took statements from Thaddeus, Cooper, and several hands about the night's events. And throughout it all, Penelope moved through the house, providing coffee, food, and calm reassurance to those who needed it. It was late afternoon before things quieted down. The attackers had been taken to town, the injured treated, and the ranch secured. Penelope found Thaddeus in his study, slumped in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You should rest," she said from the doorway. "You've been up for over 24 hours. He looked up, seeming almost surprised to see her. "There's still work to be done. Damaged fences to repair, stock to check. Cooper and the men are handling it," she assured him. "You need sleep." For once, he didn't argue. Rising wearily, he followed her upstairs to their bedroom where she helped him remove his boots and jacket. As he stretched out on the bed, still fully clothed otherwise, his eyes met hers. "Thank you," he said simply. Penelope nodded, understanding that his gratitude encompassed far more than her current assistance. She turned to leave, to give him privacy for rest, but his voice stopped her. "Stay," he said softly. "Please." She hesitated only briefly before sitting on the edge of the bed beside him. His eyes were already closing, exhaustion claiming him rapidly. "I thought you would die out there," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "standing in the open like that." "It was a calculated risk," he murmured, his words slurring slightly with approaching sleep. "Had to end it, protect what's mine." "Your land," she said, understanding his priorities. "And you," he added, so quietly she almost missed it. Then sleep claimed him, his breathing deepening into the rhythm of exhausted slumber. Penelope sat beside him for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his chest, contemplating the man who had bought her like property, yet risked his life to protect her. The contradiction fascinated her, the cold businessman and the fierce protector, existing in the same complex individual. Eventually, she rose and drew the curtains against the late afternoon sun. At the door, she paused for one last look at her sleeping husband before quietly closing the door behind her. The days following the attack brought a new rhythm to the ranch and to Penelope's marriage. Thaddeus, perhaps softened by the shared danger or simply too busy with ranch repairs to maintain his usual reserve, included her more in ranch decisions. He sought her opinion on which hands deserved bonuses for their courage during the attack, consulted her about ordering supplies for the approaching winter, even asked her preference regarding cattle breeds for the spring expansion he was planning. For her part, Penelope found herself responding to this new openness with enthusiasm. She had always been capable. Managing her father's household had required intelligence and resourcefulness, but now she discovered talents she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to keep the ranch's books, freeing Thaddeus for other work. She organized the storage cellars for winter, ensuring adequate provisions. And each evening, she shared her accomplishments and challenges with her husband over dinner, their conversations growing longer and more engaging. October brought the first snowfall, earlier than usual as Thaddeus had predicted. Penelope stood at the bedroom window watching fat white flakes drift past, marveling at how the landscape was transformed in mere hours. She had never seen snow like this in Ohio, so pristine, so vast, blanketing the mountains and valleys in silent white. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Thaddeus said, joining her at the window. He had returned from checking the herds, his coat still dusted with melting snowflakes. "It's magnificent," she agreed, "though I imagine it complicates ranch work considerably." "It does," he acknowledged, "but the men know their jobs. The cattle have been moved to the sheltered pastures, extra feed distributed." He hesitated, then added, "I have something for you." Curious, Penelope turned from the window as he retrieved a package from the wardrobe. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, not decorative, but carefully done. "What's this?" she asked, accepting the unexpectedly heavy bundle. "Open it," he encouraged, a rare hint of anticipation in his voice. Inside, she found a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of high-quality pens and ink. The journal's cover was soft to the touch, embossed with delicate wildflowers around the edges. "I noticed you writing letters on scrap paper," Thaddeus explained. "Thought you might appreciate something proper." Penelope ran her fingers over the journal's cover, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." "Winter is long here," he continued, seemingly emboldened by her reaction. "Many hours to fill when snow makes travel impossible. I thought perhaps you might enjoy recording your observations or writing stories if that interests you." "It does," she admitted, surprised that he had noticed her scribbling. "I used to write stories as a girl. My mother encouraged it, but my father—" She trailed off, remembering her father's dismissive attitude toward what he called her frivolous scribblings. "Your father was a fool in many respects," Thaddeus said matter-of-factly. "Your mind is one of your finest qualities. It should be exercised." The compliment, delivered in his typical straightforward manner, warmed Penelope more than any flowery praise might have. "Thank you," she said again, meeting his gaze, "for seeing me." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. For a moment, she thought he might move closer, might even touch her. Instead, he nodded once and stepped back. "Dinner will be ready soon," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Mrs. Jenkins is making venison stew." That night, as they prepared for bed, Penelope felt a new awareness between them, an unspoken tension that was not unpleasant but rather charged with possibility. As she braided her hair for sleep, she caught Thaddeus watching her in the mirror, his expression unguarded for once, revealing an appreciation that sent heat rising to her cheeks. They still maintained their physical distance in the bed they shared, but something had changed nonetheless. When Penelope woke in the night to find snow still falling outside, she was aware of Thaddeus beside her, his breathing even but not deep enough for true sleep. "Are you awake?" she whispered. "Yes," he replied, his voice low in the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, the future, spring breeding plans, new grazing areas we might develop. "Always planning," she observed, smiling though he couldn't see it. "It's how I've survived," he said simply, looking ahead, preparing. "And what do you see when you look ahead?" she asked, her heart beating a little faster at her own boldness. Again, that thoughtful silence. "Growth," he finally said. "For the ranch, perhaps. Children eventually, a legacy to build for." The mention of children sent a flutter through Penelope's stomach. In their months of marriage, Thaddeus had not once approached her as a husband might a wife in the physical sense. She had been grateful for this initially, but lately, "Children would be nice," she agreed softly. "A home filled with laughter." "Did you laugh much growing up?" he asked unexpectedly. "When my mother was alive, yes. She found joy in small things, taught me to do the same." Penelope turned onto her side, facing him though she could barely make out his profile in the darkness. "What about you?" "Was there laughter in your childhood?" "Not much," he admitted. "My father was strict, believed showing emotion was weakness." "Is that why you keep yourself so contained?" she asked gently. "Because you were taught it was weak to feel." Thaddeus shifted slightly and she sensed his surprise at her perception. "Perhaps," he allowed, "or perhaps it's simply habit after years of solitude." "You're not alone anymore," Penelope reminded him, her voice barely above a whisper. His hand found hers beneath the covers, warm and calloused. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." They fell asleep like that, hands joined in the darkness, a small intimacy that nonetheless represented a significant shift in their relationship. The weeks that followed brought more such moments, brief touches as they passed in hallways, lingering glances across the dinner table, conversations that stretched late into the evening by the fireplace. Penelope began to see glimpses of the man beneath Thaddeus's controlled exterior, his dry humor, his surprising knowledge of literature, his genuine concern for the welfare of his workers. November brought heavier snows and the visit from Dr. Morrison that Thaddeus had mentioned. The doctor was a jovial, bearded man who arrived by sleigh, bringing with him not only Thaddeus's medication but news from Denver and the wider world. "Mrs. Whitaker," he greeted Penelope warmly. "A pleasure to finally meet you. Your husband mentioned his marriage in his last letter, but failed to mention his bride's beauty." Penelope blushed at the compliment while Thaddeus looked faintly uncomfortable. "Thank you for making the journey in such weather, doctor," she said, helping him remove his snow-covered coat. "All part of the service," Morrison replied cheerfully. "Now, Thaddeus, shall we conduct your examination first, or would you prefer to catch up over coffee?" "The examination," Thaddeus decided. "Penelope will join us. She's aware of my condition." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, but he nodded approvingly. "Excellent. It's better to have no secrets between husband and wife, especially regarding matters of health, in Thaddeus's study, doctor." Morrison conducted a thorough examination, asking detailed questions about any seizures experienced since his last visit. To Penelope's surprise, Thaddeus admitted to having had 2 episodes, neither of which she had witnessed. "You didn't tell me," she said when the doctor stepped out briefly to retrieve something from his bag. "They occurred while I was out with the herd," Thaddeus explained. "Cooper was with me, he knows what to do." "Still, I should have been informed," she insisted. "I'm your wife." Something like regret flickered across his features. "You're right, I'm not accustomed to sharing such things." When Dr. Morrison returned, he provided a fresh supply of medication, a bitter-smelling liquid that Thaddeus was to take twice daily. "The episodes are less frequent than last year," the doctor observed encouragingly. "The treatment appears to be working. Will he ever be completely cured?" Penelope asked. Morrison's expression grew more reserved. "The honest answer, Mrs. Whitaker, is that we don't know. Some patients experience fewer seizures as they age, some remain consistent, others worsen. But with proper care and medication, many live full, productive lives." "As I intend to," Thaddeus stated firmly. Of course, the doctor agreed. And having a supportive wife will make a significant difference. He smiled at Penelope. Many women would be frightened by such a condition. Your understanding is commendable. After the examination, they shared a pleasant dinner during which Dr. Morrison regaled them with news and gossip from Denver. He stayed the night, departing the following morning with promises to return in 3 months. That evening, as they sat before the fire in the parlor, Penelope finally asked the question that had been on her mind since the doctor's visit. "Why didn't you tell me about your episodes?" Thaddeus looked up from his book, his expression carefully neutral. "I didn't want to concern you unnecessarily. Or perhaps you didn't want me to see you vulnerable," she suggested gently. He was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "Perhaps," he finally acknowledged. "I've spent my adult life ensuring no one sees weakness in me. It's difficult to change that habit. Even with your wife, especially with you," he admitted, surprising her. "Your opinion matters to me more than I expected it would." The candid confession touched Penelope deeply. "Thaddeus," she said softly, using his given name for perhaps the first time, "I didn't marry a legend or a statue. I married a man. Men have strengths and weaknesses. It's what makes them human. Is that what you want? A human husband rather than a provider and protector?" His voice held no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "I want both," she replied honestly. "The strong rancher who built all this from nothing, and the man who notices I like to write and gives me a beautiful journal. I want the whole of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable to show." Thaddeus set his book aside, his pale eyes intent on her face. "And if the whole of me is more flawed than you bargained for, then we match," she said simply. "For I am surely more opinionated and stubborn than the obedient wife you thought you purchased." A surprised laugh escaped him, a rich, warm sound she had rarely heard. "I never wanted an obedient wife, Penelope. If I had, I wouldn't have been attracted to your father's description of you." "Attracted?" she echoed, her heart quickening at his choice of words. He rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, extending his hand to her. When she placed her fingers in his, he drew her to her feet, their bodies closer than they had ever been. "Yes," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. "Attracted, first to the idea of you, then to the reality." Penelope's breath caught in her throat as his free hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Thaddeus," she whispered, uncertain what else to say. "I purchased a wife," he said, his voice low and intense, "but I find myself wanting to earn a partner, if you're willing." In answer, Penelope rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as Thaddeus's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. His response was passionate yet controlled, as if he were holding himself in check even now. When they finally parted, both breathing more rapidly, Penelope saw wonder in his eyes and hunger. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "I promised myself I wouldn't take anything from you that wasn't freely given," he explained. "Our arrangement began as a transaction. I wanted whatever grew between us to be genuine." His consideration moved her deeply. This man who had bought her like property had waited patiently for her to come to him willingly, respecting her choice even when, legally, he had every right to demand her affection. "It is genuine," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "What I feel for you, it's real, Thaddeus, not gratitude or obligation, but something more." That night, when they retired to their bedroom, the careful distance they had maintained for months dissolved. Thaddeus's touch was gentle yet confident as he helped her remove her dress, his eyes darkening with desire as more of her skin was revealed. Penelope, initially nervous, found herself responding with unexpected passion to his caresses. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, Thaddeus attentive to her comfort and pleasure. When they lay together afterward, her head on his chest and his arm wrapped securely around her, Penelope felt a sense of rightness, of completion that she had never expected to find in this arranged marriage. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his fingers stroking her hair. "Yes," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his chest. "More than all right, I never thought." He began, then paused, seeming to search for words. "What?" she encouraged. "I never thought I could feel this way," he admitted. "Connected to another person like this, it's unsettling, but in the best possible way," Penelope smiled against his skin. The great Thaddeus Whitaker, unsettled by a wife he bought for a bargain price, he tensed slightly beneath her. "Don't say it like that." She propped herself up on an elbow to look at his face. "Like what?" As if you were a purchase, a possession. His expression was serious, almost troubled. "Whatever brought you here, whatever arrangement was made with your father, that's not what you are to me now. What am I to you?" She asked, holding her breath. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "Everything," he said simply. "You're everything." Winter settled fully over Montana, transforming the landscape into a pristine wilderness of white. Days shortened, the sun making brief appearances before surrendering to long, cold nights. The ranch operated at a reduced pace, with the hands focusing on maintaining the cattle through the harsh weather rather than expanding operations. For Penelope and Thaddeus, the enforced isolation created a bubble of intimacy. Evenings were spent reading aloud to each other by the fire, playing chess at which Penelope proved surprisingly adept, or simply talking, sharing childhood memories, hopes for the future, fears rarely voiced to others. Nights brought a growing physical connection as they explored each other with increasing confidence and passion. One stormy December evening, as wind howled around the eaves and snow piled against the windows, they lay entwined in their bed, warm beneath layers of quilts despite the frigid air beyond. "Tell me about your first year here," Penelope requested, her head pillowed on Thaddeus's shoulder. "How did you choose this place?" He was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare arm. "I was 26, had saved every penny from 5 years working cattle drives and ranch jobs, wanted land of my own." His voice took on a reminiscent quality she'd rarely heard. "Rode for weeks looking for the right place. When I came over that ridge and saw this valley, I knew immediately." "What made it right?" she asked, enjoying this glimpse into his past. "Water access, good grazing, defensible position," he chuckled softly, "and it was beautiful." "That shouldn't have mattered to a practical man, but it did." "It matters to me too," she assured him. "I've come to love this land almost as much as you do." His arm tightened around her. "The first winter was brutal. Lived in a one-room cabin I built myself, nearly starved before spring came." "But you survived," she said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "You always survive." "Now I have something to survive for," he replied, tilting her face up to his for a deeper kiss. Later, as Thaddeus slept beside her, Penelope found herself contemplating how completely her life had changed in less than a year. From resigned spinsterhood in Ohio to wife of a Montana rancher, from property to partner, from stranger to lover. The journey had been unexpected in every way, yet she couldn't imagine any other path now. Christmas brought a brief respite in the weather, allowing the ranch hands who hadn't traveled to family to gather in the main house for a feast prepared by Penelope, Mrs. Jenkins, and Laura. Thaddeus, to everyone's surprise, including Penelope's, distributed bonuses and gifts: new gloves for some men, knives for others, books for those who could read. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Whitaker," Cooper commented with a rare smile as he accepted a fine pocket watch. "Never known you to be so generous at Christmas before." Thaddeus glanced at Penelope across the room where she was serving pie. "Perhaps I have more to be grateful for this year," he replied quietly. Later, when the men had returned to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Jenkins and Laura to their quarters, Thaddeus presented Penelope with her own gift, a delicate gold locket with their initials engraved on the back. "It's beautiful," she breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny painted portrait of the two of them, so skillfully rendered that Penelope gasped in surprise. "How did you manage this?" "There's an artist in Helena who works from descriptions. Cooper rode there last month with my commission." Thaddeus looked almost shy as he added, "I wanted you to have something that represented us together, our new family." "Our family," she repeated softly, touching the locket with reverent fingers. "I have something for you too, though it can't compare to this." From beneath the small pine tree they had decorated in the parlor, she retrieved a package wrapped in brown paper and ribbon. Thaddeus opened it carefully to reveal a handsome leather vest, finely stitched and clearly made with great care. "I made it," she explained as he examined it with obvious admiration. "Mrs. Jenkins helped with the pattern, but the sewing is mine. I wanted to create something useful that you could wear every day, a reminder of me even when we're apart." "It's perfect," he said, shrugging it on over his shirt. The fit was excellent, the craftsmanship remarkable for someone who had only recently learned leatherwork. "Thank you, Penelope." As January gave way to February, and February to March, the long Montana winter began to loosen its grip. Snow remained on the ground, but the days grew longer, the sun stronger. Ranch activities increased as preparations began for the busy spring season ahead. One crisp March morning, Penelope woke feeling unusually tired and slightly nauseated. She dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the symptoms persisted for several days, Mrs. Jenkins eyed her knowingly over breakfast preparations. "When did you last have your monthly time, Mrs. Whitaker?" the housekeeper asked directly once they were alone. Penelope blinked, mentally calculating. With a rush of realization, she whispered, "Over 6 weeks ago, I didn't even notice with everything else happening." Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly. "I thought as much, the way you've been turning green at the smell of coffee, pushing food around your plate." "You're with child, I'd wager." "A baby," Penelope murmured, her hand going instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I need to tell Thaddeus." She found him in the barn, discussing spring breeding plans with Cooper. The foreman tactfully excused himself when he saw her approach, leaving them alone among the warm animal smells and soft whickering of horses. "Is everything all right?" Thaddeus asked, immediately noting her serious expression. "Yes," she assured him. "Everything is wonderful, actually." Taking a deep breath, she shared her suspicion. "I believe I'm expecting a child, our child." Thaddeus stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then, to her astonishment, he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses before lifting her into his arms and spinning her in a circle. "Careful." She laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "The baby," he set her down immediately, his hands gentle as they came to rest on her waist. "A baby," he repeated, wonder filling his voice. "Are you certain?" "Reasonably so," she replied. "Mrs. Jenkins noticed the signs before I did." "It would seem we're to be parents by autumn." Thaddeus's face transformed with a smile more open and joyful than any she had seen from him. "I never thought," he began, then shook his head. "I never dared hope for such happiness." In that moment, looking at her husband's radiant face, Penelope realized how completely she had come to love this complex, difficult man. What had begun as a business arrangement had transformed into something profound and precious, a true marriage. A partnership based on mutual respect and deepening affection. Dr. Morrison, arriving for his quarterly visit in early April, confirmed Penelope's pregnancy and pronounced her in excellent health. The child should arrive in late September or early October, he informed them. Just after harvest, convenient timing. As if the baby consulted an agricultural calendar, Penelope teased, earning a laugh from both men. Spring brought a flurry of activity to the ranch, calving season, fence repairs, preparation of fields for summer grazing. Thaddeus divided his time between these essential tasks and creating a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, converting a small storage room into a bright, cheerful space for their coming child. Penelope, though increasingly affected by her pregnancy, insisted on maintaining her role in ranch management. She kept the books as always, planned menus with Mrs. Jenkins, and even rode out occasionally on the gentlest mare, with Thaddeus hovering protectively nearby to observe the ranch operations. "You should rest more," he fretted one evening as she massaged her swollen ankles. "The doctor said overexertion isn't good for you or the baby." "I'm not overexerting myself," she assured him. "And keeping busy makes the time pass more quickly. I'm eager to meet our child." Thaddeus knelt before her chair, taking over the massage with strong, gentle hands. "As am I, but I need you both healthy and strong." His expression grew serious. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you, Penelope. You've become essential to me." The admission from a man who had spent his adult life needing no one moved her deeply. She leaned forward to kiss him, pouring all her love into the gesture. "Nothing will happen," she promised. "We're both stronger than that." Summer brought scorching heat to Montana, the lush green valleys baking under relentless sun. Penelope's pregnancy progressed normally, her body changing to accommodate the growing child within. By August, her movements had slowed considerably, and she spent most afternoons resting in the shade of the porch, writing in the journal Thaddeus had given her months ago. "What are you working on?" he asked one evening, settling beside her after a day checking distant pastures. "A story," she admitted, slightly embarrassed, "for the baby, about a brave rancher who built a kingdom from nothing." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Fiction, based on truth," she corrected, allowing him to take the journal and read a few pages. "The names have been changed to protect the proud." A smile tugged at his lips as he read. "You've made me sound heroic." "You are heroic," she said simply. "You fought for what you wanted, built something lasting, protected what was yours." Her hand covered his, "including me." As September approached, preparations for the birth intensified. A midwife from town was engaged to stay at the ranch during Penelope's final weeks. The nursery was completed, filled with a handcrafted crib built by Thaddeus himself, soft blankets sewn by Mrs. Jenkins, and tiny clothes purchased during Thaddeus's rare trips to town. One warm afternoon, as Penelope folded these diminutive garments, a knock came at the bedroom door. Cooper stood there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mrs. Whitaker, might I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Cooper," she replied, setting aside her work. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, madam, I just—" He twisted his hat in his hands. "The men and we wanted to give you and the boss something for the baby, if that's acceptable." Touched by the gesture, Penelope smiled warmly. "That's more than acceptable, Mr. Cooper. It's very thoughtful." The foreman nodded, relief evident in his weathered face. "We made it ourselves during evening hours. All of us contributed something." From behind his back, he produced a beautiful, mobile, intricately carved wooden animals suspended from a circular frame. Horses, cattle, deer, and even a bear, each piece skillfully crafted and polished to a soft gleam. "It's exquisite," Penelope breathed, taking the gift with reverent hands. "The baby will love it. Thaddeus will be so touched." Cooper shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with emotional moments. "Well, we just wanted to show our respect. The boss has built something good here. Fair place to work, fair man to work for." His eyes met hers briefly. "Been different since you came, Mrs. Whitaker. Better, he's happier." The simple observation from a man who had known Thaddeus longer than anyone meant more to Penelope than the most elaborate compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for everything you do here and for this beautiful gift." That evening, she showed the mobile to Thaddeus, who examined each carved piece with genuine admiration. "Cooper did the horses," he noted. "He has a gift for capturing their movement, and this cattle drive scene, that's Charlie's work. He comes from a family of woodcarvers." "They respect you," Penelope said, watching his face. "They wanted to honor our child." Thaddeus was quiet for a moment, running his fingers over the polished wood. "When I came here, I thought success meant land, cattle, wealth. I never considered." He looked up at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way few ever saw. "I never considered that building something worth having might include building relationships, a community, a family. And now," she prompted softly, "now I understand that this," he gestured around them, indicating not just the room but the ranch, the people who worked it. "All of it means nothing without people to share it with, without you." On a clear September morning, with the first hints of autumn coloring the distant trees, Penelope's labor began. Thaddeus sent a ranch hand galloping for the midwife, while Mrs. Jenkins prepared the bedroom with practiced efficiency. "First babies often take their time," the housekeeper assured Thaddeus as he paced anxiously outside the door. "Try not to worry too much." Hours passed, the sun tracking across the sky as Penelope labored within their bedroom, the midwife arriving mid-morning to take charge of the birth. Thaddeus alternated between pacing the hallway and sitting with his head in his hands at the top of the stairs, every cry from behind the closed door piercing him like a physical blow. Cooper found him there as evening approached, the normally stoic foreman looking almost as concerned as his employer. "Any news?" Thaddeus shook his head wearily. "The midwife says everything is progressing normally, but it's taking so long. Mrs. Whitaker is strong," Cooper offered. "Strongest woman I've ever met in her own way." "I know," Thaddeus agreed, "but if anything happens to her—" He couldn't complete the thought, the possibility too devastating to voice. Cooper clasped his shoulder briefly, a rare physical gesture from the reserved man. "Have faith, boss. In her and in God." As night fell, the ranch hands gathered on the porch below, maintaining a quiet vigil. Inside, Penelope fought through the most challenging battle of her life, drawing strength from the midwife's calm instructions and the thought of the child she would soon hold. Finally, as the moon rose high over the Montana plains, a new cry pierced the night, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Thaddeus, who had been sitting motionless outside the door for hours, leapt to his feet, heart pounding as he waited for someone to emerge. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened, and the midwife appeared, her tired face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitaker, you have a healthy son." Thaddeus stared at her, unable to fully process the words through the fog of anxiety and exhaustion. "Penelope." He managed to ask, "Is she—" "Your wife is fine," the midwife assured him. "Tired, of course, but she did beautifully. She's asking for you." Inside the bedroom, Penelope reclined against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Thaddeus entered, her smile so full of love that his throat tightened with emotion. "Meet your son," she said softly, tilting the bundle so he could see the tiny face within, red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Thaddeus approached the bed cautiously, almost reverently, sinking down beside her. "He's perfect," he whispered, reaching out a hesitant finger to touch the baby's cheek. "You're both perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Penelope asked. With careful movements, Thaddeus gathered his son into his arms, marveling at how something so small could already feel so significant. The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, his tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl reflexively around his father's finger. "Hello, little one," Thaddeus murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." "What shall we call him?" Penelope asked, watching the two most important people in her world become acquainted. Thaddeus considered the question, studying his son's face. "James," he suggested, "after your father." Penelope's eyes widened in surprise. "My father, but you hardly knew him and what you did know." "Without him, I wouldn't have you," Thaddeus said simply. "And without you, I wouldn't have our son. James seems fitting." "James Thomas Whitaker," Penelope decided, adding Thaddeus's middle name, "a strong name for a boy who will grow up on this land." "The next generation," Thaddeus agreed, carefully returning the baby to her arms, "the future of Whitaker Ranch." As news of the birth spread, the ranch hands outside let out a cheer that carried through the night air. Inside, Thaddeus settled on the bed beside his wife and son, one arm encircling Penelope's shoulders, the other hand gently touching the baby's head. "When your father wrote to accept my offer," he said quietly, "I thought I was acquiring a practical solution to a problem, a wife to manage my household, eventually provide children I never imagined." "What?" Penelope prompted when he hesitated. "I never imagined that in gaining a wife I would find everything I never knew I was missing." His eyes, usually so controlled, shone with unshed tears. "I love you, Penelope, more than I believed I was capable of loving anyone." "I love you too," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Despite how we began, or perhaps because of it, every step of this journey has brought us here to this moment, to our family." Outside, the Montana night spread vast and star-filled above Whitaker Ranch. Inside, the family that would shape its future generations slept peacefully, a man who had built an empire from nothing, a woman who had found strength in unexpected circumstances, and a child who represented all their hopes for the future. What had begun as a transaction A woman sold to a stranger with cruel eyes had transformed into something neither could have predicted. A love that would endure through generations, as enduring as the land itself. 3 years later, Penelope stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching her husband chase their laughing son across the yard. James, sturdy and energetic at 3, squealed with delight as Thaddeus caught him, swinging him high into the air before settling him on his shoulders. The ranch had prospered in these years, expanding to include the former Jenkins property which Thaddeus had indeed purchased from Frank's nephew. New barns had been built, more cattle acquired, and additional hands hired to manage the growing operation. But the greatest growth had been within the family itself. Thaddeus, once so reserved and controlled, now laughed openly as he played with his son. The cold eyes that had once frightened Penelope now warmed with love whenever they fell upon her or James. And within her, a second child grew, a daughter, the midwife suspected, due to arrive with the spring calves. As her family approached the house, Penelope placed a hand on her swelling stomach, filled with gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. From a woman sold to cover gambling debts to the beloved wife of Thaddeus Whitaker and mother to his children, a journey neither of them could have imagined on that dusty train platform years ago. "Papa says I can have my own pony soon," James announced as they reached the porch, his face alight with excitement. "Does he now?" Penelope raised an eyebrow at her husband, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "A small, very gentle pony," Thaddeus clarified. "And not until his next birthday." "We'll discuss it," Penelope said diplomatically, ruffling her son's dark hair so like his father's as Thaddeus set him down. Later, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues, James having been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Thaddeus took Penelope's hand in his. "Are you happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if needing reassurance that she didn't regret the path her life had taken. "Completely," she assured him, squeezing his fingers. "I have everything I could want right here, you, James, our home, this land." She placed their joined hands over her rounded belly. "And this little one on the way," Thaddeus smiled, the expression now coming naturally to him after years of practice. "When I said she's mine that day in town, I never imagined how wrong I was." "Wrong?" Penelope tilted her head, curious. "You were never mine to possess," he explained, his thumb tracing patterns on her hand. "You were your own woman from the moment you stepped off that train, brave and resilient despite your circumstances. I didn't own you, I simply had the good fortune to build a life with you." "A good life," she agreed softly, "better than either of us could have predicted." As darkness fell over Whitaker Ranch, they remained on the porch, content in each other's company, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a cruel bargain had blossomed into the truest kind of love, one built on mutual respect, shared struggles, and the daily choice to see and honor each other fully. The cruel-eyed stranger who had purchased a bride was gone, replaced by a loving husband who had learned that the greatest wealth came not from possessing land or cattle or even people, but from building a life of genuine connection. And the woman who had been sold now understood that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the most beautiful destinations.